Walt Harrison was 93 years old and had lived in the same small house for nearly 50 years. His home was modest, with chipped paint on the walls and an old fence leaning at odd angles. Walt didn't mind, though. To him, it was just a house, a place to rest his head at the end of the day. What mattered to him were the memories it held, memories of a life that seemed like it belonged to someone else now. Walt was a World War II veteran. He had served as a young soldier in some of the war's toughest battles, earning medals for bravery that now sat in a dusty box under his bed. To his neighbors, he was just the old man who lived quietly on the corner. Few knew about the sacrifices he had made or the bravery he had shown so many decades ago. Life had grown quieter for Walt over the years. His wife had passed away 15 years ago, and his 2 children lived in different states, visiting only occasionally. His days were spent tending to his small garden, reading old history books, and watching the birds that gathered around his bird feeder. Walt didn't complain, but the loneliness weighed on him more than he let on. One chilly spring morning, Walt decided to fix his broken fence. The wind had knocked down several of the wooden planks, leaving the once sturdy structure barely standing. He grabbed his toolbox, which was nearly as old as he was, and shuffled outside. The tools felt heavy in his hands, and his back ached as he bent down to pick up the planks. After only a few minutes, he was out of breath and had to sit on a small stool, staring at the mess before him. Lisa, Walt's next-door neighbor, noticed him from her kitchen window. Lisa had always felt a quiet fondness for the elderly man who seemed so gentle and polite. She often saw him watering his flowers or sitting on his porch with a faraway look in his eyes. That morning, seeing him struggle with the fence, she decided to check on him. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," Lisa called out as she approached, her friendly smile lighting up her face. "Do you need some help with that?" Walt looked up, surprised by her offer. "Oh no, thank you," he replied with a soft chuckle. "This old fence, and I have been through worse. I'll manage." But Lisa could see he was struggling. She crouched beside him and gently took one of the planks from his hands. "Why don't you let me help? It'll go faster with 2 people, she insisted. Walt hesitated but finally nodded, grateful for the company. As they worked together, Lisa started asking questions about his life. At first, Walt was reluctant to share, but her curiosity was genuine, and soon he found himself talking about his days as a soldier. He described his platoon, the battles they fought, and the friends he had lost. Lisa listened intently, her admiration for him growing with each word. By the time the fence was patched up enough to stand, Lisa had tears in her eyes. She realized that Walt was more than just her quiet neighbor. He was a hero whose story deserved to be told. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him. With a heart full of determination, she decided to share his story, hoping to give him the recognition and support he deserved. Little did she know, her small act of kindness would change everything. That night, Lisa sat at her kitchen table, her mind racing with thoughts about Walt. She couldn't shake the image of him, sitting on that small stool, struggling to fix his fence. The stories he had shared stayed with her. The bravery, the losses, and the quiet strength of a man who had given so much yet lived in solitude. She knew she had to do something to help. Lisa opened her laptop and began typing. Her words flowed from the heart as she described Walt's life, his service during the war, and the challenges he faced as an elderly veteran living alone. She included a picture she had taken of Walt's house that day, showing the old, leaning fence they had worked on together. When she finished, she posted it on a local community group page with the caption, "This is Walt Harrison, our neighbor and a forgotten hero. Let's come together to show him he's not alone." Within minutes, her post started gaining attention. Comments poured in from people expressing admiration for Walt and sharing their own stories about family members who had served in the military. Some offered to help repair his home, while others wanted to bring him meals or visit him. Lisa was overwhelmed by the response, but she felt a sense of hope. Maybe this small act would make a big difference. The next morning, Walt was unaware of the growing buzz around his story. He sat on his porch with a cup of tea, watching the birds flit around his feeder. It was another quiet day, just like so many before it. But Lisa knew things were about to change. One of the first people to reach out to Lisa was Mike, the leader of a local biker group known for their community service. The group, called the Steel Guardians, had helped countless people in need over the years, from raising money for sick children to repairing homes for struggling families. Mike had seen Lisa's post and was deeply moved by Walt's story. He called Lisa immediately. "Hi, this is Mike," he said, his voice warm but determined. "I saw your post about Mr. Harrison. My group would love to help. We've got tools, hands, and a lot of heart. Can we come by this weekend?" Lisa was thrilled. "Absolutely. Walt doesn't know yet, but I think he'll be touched by your kindness." Over the next few days, Lisa coordinated with Mike and other volunteers who had reached out. She visited local businesses to ask for donations, and many were eager to help. A hardware store offered supplies, a bakery promised to provide snacks, and a small construction company donated their time to assist with repairs. The community was coming together in a way Lisa had never seen before. When Saturday morning arrived, Walt was sitting in his usual spot on the porch. The distant rumble of engines caught his attention, growing louder as it approached. Soon, a procession of motorcycles came into view, their riders clad in leather jackets and helmets. They parked along the street in front of Walt's house, and one by one, they climbed off their bikes. Walt stood, unsure of what was happening. Mike approached him with a wide smile and extended his hand. "Mr. Harrison, it's an honor to meet you," he said. "We're here to help." Walt looked at the group, then at Lisa, who stood nearby beaming with pride. "Help? I don't understand," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Mike gestured to the bikers, who were unloading tools and supplies from their bikes. "We heard about your story, sir. We just want to give back to someone who's given so much. Let us fix that fence and anything else you need." For the first time in years, Walt felt a lump in his throat that wasn't from sadness but gratitude. He nodded, unable to find the words to express how much this meant to him. The quiet man who thought he had been forgotten was about to discover just how much his life still mattered to those around him. The sound of the roaring engines echoed down Walt's quiet street as the bikers gathered in front of his small house. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, curious about the unusual commotion. Some even stepped outside, watching in awe as dozens of motorcycles lined up neatly along the curb. The scene was almost surreal, and at the center of it all was Walt, standing on his porch, gripping the railing for support as he tried to process what was happening. Mike, the leader of the group, stepped forward with a broad smile. "Mr. Harrison," he said warmly, "we're here to help." His voice was kind but filled with purpose, a reflection of the mission that had brought the group together. Walt looked at the bikers, their leather jackets and rugged appearance contrasting sharply with the humble surroundings of his home. He glanced at Lisa, who stood beside him, her face glowing with excitement. "I don't understand," he said quietly, shaking his head. "Why would you do this for me?" Mike placed a hand on Walt's shoulder, his tone steady and sincere. "Because you deserve it, sir. You gave so much to this country, and now it's time for us to give something back to you." Tears welled up in Walt's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show too much emotion. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "You don't need to say anything," Mike replied with a smile. "Just let us take care of you today." The bikers wasted no time getting to work. They unloaded tools, lumber, and supplies from their trucks and bikes, turning Walt's yard into a hive of activity. Some worked on repairing the fence, replacing broken planks with new ones, and giving it a fresh coat of paint. Others began cleaning up the yard, trimming overgrown bushes, and mowing the patchy grass. Walt watched in amazement as these strangers, people he had never met, poured their energy into fixing his home. They worked with skill and efficiency, but it wasn't just about the labor. They took time to talk to Walt, asking him about his life and his experiences. Walt found himself opening up, sharing stories he hadn't told in years. One biker named Sarah, a petite woman with a bright smile, sat down next to Walt during a break. "You're a real hero, you know that," she said, handing him a bottle of water. Walt chuckled softly. "I'm no hero, just an old soldier who did his duty." "Well," Sarah said, her tone firm, "to us, that makes you a hero. And we're lucky to know you." As the day went on, more neighbors joined in. Families brought food and drinks, while children offered to help clean up. Walt's quiet street transformed into a bustling scene of teamwork and kindness. Local news reporters arrived, drawn by the heartwarming story. Walt, who had lived in the shadows for so long, suddenly found himself at the center of attention. By the end of the day, the fence was standing tall and freshly painted. The yard was clean and vibrant, and the old house looked almost new. The bikers even repaired a broken window and patched up some holes in the roof. Walt could hardly believe his eyes. As the sun began to set, Mike called everyone together. "Mr. Harrison," he said, holding up an American flag, "we wanted to give you one more thing to show our gratitude." Together, the group raised the flag on a new pole they had installed in his front yard. Walt stood beneath it, his hand over his heart, feeling a wave of emotions he couldn't put into words. That night, as Walt sat on his porch, the light of the new flagpole casting a soft glow over his yard, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The kindness of strangers had shown him he was not forgotten. Instead, he was part of something much bigger, a community that cared. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the street as the bikers got to work. Walt's once quiet yard was now alive with the sound of laughter, hammering, and cheerful conversations. Neighbors who had rarely spoken to one another before were now chatting and working side by side, brought together by the shared purpose of helping Walt. Mike, the leader of the biker group, organized everyone like a seasoned captain. "All right, team. Let's split up. We've got fences to fix, a yard to clean, and some repairs inside the house. Let's make this place shine." His booming voice carried over the busy crowd, and everyone cheered before diving into their tasks. Walt sat on his porch, watching in awe as his home was transformed before his eyes. He still couldn't believe that so many people, most of whom he had never met, were here just for him. A young man named Jake, a biker with a kind smile and an easy laugh, knelt beside Walt to check on him. "Mr. Harrison, you doing all right?" Jake asked, handing him a glass of lemonade. Walt nodded, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to thank you all. This is more than I ever expected." Jake smiled warmly. "You don't need to thank us. You've already done enough for this country. We're just making sure you know how much that means to us." As the work continued, Walt found himself drawn into conversations with the volunteers. A woman named Sarah, who had been cleaning up the garden, sat beside him during her break. "You must have so many stories from your time in the service," she said, her eyes full of curiosity. Walt hesitated for a moment before beginning to speak. "There are stories, sure. Some good, some hard to tell. But I've always believed that what matters most is how you carry on after the tough times." Sarah nodded, her admiration for him evident. "I think you've carried on pretty well. Look at all these people who are here because of you." Walt glanced around at the bustling scene, a faint smile forming on his face. "It's hard to believe. For so long, I thought people had forgotten about me." By noon, the yard was unrecognizable. The fence, once leaning and broken, now stood tall and freshly painted. The flower beds were cleared of weeds, and colorful blooms had been planted by some of the children who had joined in to help. Inside the house, a small team was patching up cracks in the walls and fixing leaky faucets. Local businesses contributed as well. A nearby bakery sent over boxes of cookies and sandwiches, while a hardware store donated materials for repairs. The spirit of generosity was contagious, and everyone pitched in with enthusiasm. As the afternoon turned into evening, The work neared completion. Mike gathered the group to unveil a surprise they had prepared. They had built a wheelchair ramp leading to Walt's porch, making it easier for him to move around. The crowd applauded as Walt, overwhelmed with gratitude, stood to thank them. "I don't have the words to express how much this means to me," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've not only fixed my home, but also reminded me that there's still so much kindness in this world." The group erupted into cheers and claps, their faces beaming with pride. For Walt, this wasn't just about the repairs. It was about the friendships that had formed, the connections that had been made, and the realization that he wasn't alone. As the bikers packed up their tools and the neighbors began to leave, Walt sat on his porch, looking out at his renewed home. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the street. It had been a day of hard work, laughter, and newfound hope, a day Walt would never forget. The morning after the bikers' visit, Walt woke up to a sight he hadn't seen in years. His home and yard looking fresh and well-kept. The fence stood strong, the garden was blooming, and the wheelchair ramp gleamed under the soft morning sun. Walt sat on his porch with a steaming cup of tea, marveling at how much had changed in just one day. For the first time in a long while, his heart felt lighter. Word of what had happened at Walt's house spread quickly through the town. Lisa's post about the bikers' incredible kindness had already gone viral locally, but now the story reached even further. People from neighboring towns started reaching out, eager to lend a hand or show support. By mid-morning, Walt's quiet street began to buzz with activity again. This time, it wasn't just the bikers. It was families, shop owners, and even teenagers who wanted to be part of something special. A local florist arrived with a truckload of flowers, offering to plant a colorful arrangement in Walt's garden. Another neighbor showed up with a ladder and a paintbrush, determined to repaint the porch. Lisa stopped by to check on Walt, her face lit up with excitement. "Mr. Harrison, you won't believe how many people want to help. You've inspired everyone," she said. Walt smiled, still trying to wrap his mind around it all. "I don't know what I did to deserve this," he said humbly. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. "You served our country, and you've lived with grace and dignity. People are just showing their gratitude." As the day went on, more people joined in. A group of teenagers volunteered to clean the windows, scrubbing away years of grime until the glass sparkled. A local handyman fixed the creaky porch steps, while another group repaired the roof. Walt, who had grown used to solitude, suddenly found himself surrounded by a sea of friendly faces. One particularly touching moment came when a young boy named Ethan approached Walt with a handmade card. The card featured a drawing of an American flag and a message in crayon that read, "Thank you for keeping us safe, Mr. Walt." Walt's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the card, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you, young man," Walt said, his voice steady but full of warmth. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." Ethan beamed and ran back to his parents, who were helping plant flowers nearby. The simple gesture from the boy touched everyone who witnessed it, reminding them of the deep impact their actions could have. By late afternoon, Walt's house looked like it had been completely transformed. The once weathered structure now stood proud, a reflection of the community's effort and love. A local restaurant brought over a hot meal for everyone who had helped, turning the yard into an impromptu picnic. Laughter and conversation filled the air as people enjoyed their food, celebrating the day's accomplishments. Walt sat in his favorite chair on the porch, watching the scene unfold. He couldn't believe how much his life had changed in just 2 days. Strangers had become friends, and his home had become a symbol of what could happen when a community came together. As the sun began to set, Lisa sat beside him, both of them enjoying the quiet after a day of activity. "How are you feeling, Mr. Harrison?" she asked gently. Walt took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Grateful," he said simply. "Grateful for all of this. For you. For them. For everything." And in that moment, with the sound of laughter and the sight of his renewed home, Walt realized something he hadn't felt in years. he wasn't alone anymore. As the days passed, Walt's house became a gathering point for the community. People stopped by to check on him, bring small gifts, or simply say hello. What started as a few kind gestures had blossomed into something much bigger, a movement to show Walt how much he was valued. One afternoon, Mike, the leader of the biker group, returned with a few members of the Steel Guardians. This time, they came with a plan that would take everyone's efforts to the next level. Mike knocked on Walt's door and greeted him with his usual warm smile. "Mr. Harrison," Mike began, "we've got something special planned for you. We want to give you a proper honor, a grand gesture to show just how much you mean to all of us." Walt raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "You've already done more than enough," he said, glancing at his freshly repaired house and garden. Mike shook his head. "We're not done yet. We've built a little something for you in the town square. We'd like you to come see it." Walt hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. Lisa, who had arrived to visit, offered to drive him into town. The ride was filled with quiet anticipation as Walt wondered what awaited him. When they arrived at the town square, Walt was stunned. A crowd had gathered, and in the center of the square stood a brand new flagpole, surrounded by a small, beautifully landscaped area. On the base of the pole was a plaque with Walt's name engraved on it, honoring his service during World War I. As Lisa helped Walt out of the car, the crowd erupted into applause. Tears welled up in Walt's eyes as he slowly approached the flagpole. Mike stepped forward with a folded American flag in his hands. "Mr. Harrison," Mike said, his voice steady and respectful, "this flagpole is dedicated to you and all you've done for our country. It's a reminder to everyone here that heroes live among us, even in the quietest corners of our towns." The crowd fell silent as Walt reached out to take the flag. His hands trembled slightly, but his grip was firm. With Mike's help, Walt raised the flag, the fabric unfurling in the breeze as it climbed to the top of the pole. When the flag reached its peak, the crowd placed their hands over their hearts as someone in the back began to sing the national anthem. Walt stood tall, his posture straighter than it had been in years. He saluted the flag with pride, his face a mix of gratitude and humility. When the anthem ended, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause once more. Afterward, people gathered around Walt, shaking his hand and thanking him for his service. Children handed him handmade cards, and a local bakery presented him with a large cake decorated with a flag motif. Walt was overwhelmed but deeply touched by the outpouring of love and support. Later that evening, as Walt returned home, he sat on his porch reflecting on the day. The flagpole in the town square was more than just a gesture. It was a symbol of the connections he had made and the impact of his story. For the first time in years, Walt felt not only appreciated but truly seen. Lisa sat beside him, her eyes shining with pride. "You've inspired so many people, Mr. Harrison," she said softly. "Your story has brought this whole community together." Walt smiled, his heart full. "I never imagined something like this could happen," he said, "but I'm grateful. Grateful for every moment." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Walt sat quietly, knowing that his life had changed forever, not because of what he had done in the past, but because of the kindness and unity of the present. As the weeks went by, Walt's life seemed to take on a new rhythm. The flagpole in the town square became a constant reminder of the incredible kindness that had surrounded him. His house, once in disrepair, now stood strong and well-kept, thanks to the work of the bikers and the community. Every time he looked out his window, he saw the vibrant garden and the freshly painted fence, a symbol of the love and support that had been shown to him. But it wasn't just his home that had changed. Walt himself felt different. For years, he had kept to himself, reluctant to share his past or his feelings. But now, with so many people reaching out to him, Walt felt a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. He started to spend more time with his neighbors, visiting them for coffee or joining them at community events. He even began sharing stories of his time in the service, stories that had been locked away in his heart for decades. One day, Lisa stopped by to visit him, a bag of groceries in hand. She smiled as she walked up the path to his porch. "Mr. Harrison, how are you doing today?" she asked, sitting down beside him. Walt smiled back, his face a little less tired than it had been in the past. "I'm doing well, Lisa. Really well. It's been nice, having people around. I didn't realize how lonely I had been until now." Lisa's heart warmed. "I'm so glad to hear that. You've earned this, Mr. Harrison. It's about time the community showed you just how much you mean to us." The two sat together for a while, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, Walt didn't feel like the quiet old man on the corner. He felt like a part of something bigger. People in the town began inviting him to events and activities, from local fairs to charity dinners. Walt didn't hesitate to join in, and each time he did, he met new people and built new friendships. One evening, as Walt sat on his porch watching the sunset, a couple of the bikers from the Steel Guardians stopped by to check on him. Mike, Sarah, and Jake all sat down with him, chatting about the latest projects they had been working on and catching up. It was a casual visit, but it meant the world to Walt. "Walt," Mike said after a while, "there's something we've been talking about. We'd like to keep helping you, but not just with repairs. We want to make sure you have everything you need going forward. How about we set up a regular visit schedule? Maybe we can help with anything around the house or just spend time with you." Walt looked at Mike, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said softly. "You've already done more than enough." "We're not done yet," Mike grinned. "You're part of our family now, Walt. We'll always have your back." Walt's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness, not sadness. He realized in that moment that his life had changed in a way he never thought possible. He had gone from being a man who had quietly lived in the shadows to being someone who was surrounded by love and friendship. As the days turned into months, Walt's home became a place of joy and laughter. The community continued to check in on him, making sure he had everything he needed and inviting him to be a part of their lives. Walt no longer felt like the forgotten hero. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance, a chance to live out the rest of his years surrounded by people who cared for him, people who saw him not just as a veteran, but as a friend. And so, with each passing day, Walt's heart grew fuller. The quiet man who had once lived alone now found himself embraced by a community, and his life was richer than he could have ever imagined. The story of a forgotten hero had become the story of a man who had finally found his place in the world. Months passed, and Walt's life continued to flourish in ways he hadn't imagined possible. His house stood proudly in the neighborhood, its new coat of paint gleaming in the sunlight, while the flowers in his garden bloomed brightly. The flagpole in the town square was now a landmark, with people often stopping by to admire the tribute that had been made in his honor. But the changes in Walt's life were not just visible in his home or the town square. They were inside him too. Walt had always been a man of few words, but now he found himself talking more, opening up about his past and sharing stories with those around him. He became a cherished part of the community, invited to town meetings, celebrations, and even family gatherings. One day, as Walt sat in his favorite chair on the porch, watching the leaves change color with the changing seasons, Mike from the biker group stopped by to visit. He had a big grin on his face, and Walt couldn't help but smile in return. "Walt, I've got something for you," Mike said, holding out an envelope. Walt took the envelope, surprised but curious. He carefully opened it, revealing an invitation. It was an invitation to be the guest of honor at the annual Veterans Day ceremony in the town. The event would include a parade, speeches, and a special ceremony honoring veterans, and they wanted Walt to be the main speaker. Walt's hands shook slightly as he read the invitation. He had never imagined being asked to speak at such an event. He had always kept to himself, never seeking attention or praise for his service. But as he thought about it, he realized how much he had changed in the past few months. He had been surrounded by so much kindness, support, and love that he could no longer keep his story to himself. "I'm honored, Mike," Walt said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But I'm not sure I'm the right person to speak." Mike laughed. "Walt, you're more than ready. You've inspired so many people around here. It's time for you to tell your story." Walt thought about it for a while. His first instinct was to shy away from the spotlight, but he knew Mike was right. It wasn't just about him. It was about the community that had embraced him and the lessons of kindness and unity that they had all learned together. As Veterans Day approached, the excitement in the town grew. People decorated their homes with American flags and banners, and the town square was filled with preparations for the ceremony. Walt's role as the guest of honor was kept secret for the most part, but the community eagerly awaited the moment when they would hear from the man who had touched so many lives. Finally, the day of the ceremony arrived. Walt stood in front of a crowd gathered in the town square. The familiar faces of his neighbors, friends, and family all around him. The American flag waved proudly above, and the sound of the national anthem filled the air. Walt took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. The crowd waited in silence, eager to hear from the man they had come to admire so much. Walt's voice was steady, but his words came from the heart. "I've spent most of my life thinking I was forgotten," Walt began. "But what I've learned in the last few months is that kindness can change everything. It can bring people together in ways you never thought possible. I'm here today because of the love and support of this community. You've all shown me that I'm not alone, and for that, I will be forever grateful." The crowd erupted into applause, and Walt smiled, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before. He had found something more important than recognition. He had found a place in the hearts of those around him, a legacy of kindness that would live on long after the ceremony ended. As Walt walked off the stage, he was greeted with cheers and congratulations. But more than anything, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come to understand that no matter how quiet or small his life may have seemed, it was the connections with others, the kindness shared, and the love given and received that made life truly meaningful. The weeks after the Veterans Day ceremony were a blur for Walt. Everywhere he went, people greeted him with warm smiles and respectful nods. The town had embraced him not just as a veteran, but as a friend. His days were no longer spent in solitude. He was part of something larger now, a tight-knit community that valued and respected him. One evening, as Walt sat on his porch, sipping his tea and watching the stars come out, Mike and a few other bikers stopped by again. They were always there, checking on him, making sure he had everything he needed. This time, they had come to talk about something new, a new project they were planning. "Walt, we've been talking," Mike began, his voice full of excitement. "We want to make sure this sense of community doesn't fade away. So we're planning something big, a yearly event to bring people together, to honor the spirit of kindness and connection. And we want you to be a part of it." Walt looked at Mike, surprised. "What kind of event?" "A community day," Mike explained. "A day where people can come together, share meals, help each other out, and just enjoy each other's company. We're calling it Walt's Day." He paused, looking at Walt with a smile. "What do you think?" Walt was overwhelmed. "You want to name the event after me?" Mike nodded. "We want to celebrate what you've brought to this town. Your story, your kindness, it's inspired all of us. It's the least we can do." For a moment, Walt didn't know what to say. He had never been one for attention or praise, but hearing Mike's words, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, he realized just how far he had come. He had gone from feeling forgotten to being the heart of something truly special. "I'm honored," Walt said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I never imagined anything like this would happen. But if it means bringing more people together, then I'm all for it." The planning for Walt's Day began immediately. The whole town rallied behind the idea, and soon, everyone was involved. Local businesses donated food and supplies. Neighbors offered to set up tables, tents, and games. The bikers worked together to organize the event, ensuring that it was a day that would reflect the spirit of kindness that had been shown to Walt. On the day of the event, the town square was filled with laughter and joy. Families gathered around picnic tables, enjoying food and drinks. Children ran through the grass, playing games, while local musicians played lively tunes. The flag that had been raised in Walt's honor fluttered proudly in the breeze. Walt stood at the center of it all, surrounded by friends and strangers alike, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had never imagined that something so beautiful could come from the simple acts of kindness he had received. This was more than just a celebration. It was a reminder of the power of community, of how even the smallest gestures could change lives. As the day came to a close, Walt stood up to speak, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I've lived many years, and I've seen a lot of things," he said, his words carrying across the crowd. "But nothing compares to what I've experienced in the last few months. You've all shown me that kindness is something worth fighting for, and I hope this day, this spirit of togetherness, lives on for generations to come." The crowd erupted into applause, and Walt felt a deep sense of peace. He had found his place, not just in his home, but in the hearts of the people around him. And as the stars twinkled above, he realized that this was just the beginning. A new chapter, a new legacy, built on the foundation of kindness, friendship, and community.